Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talkers About Music. I'm Ari, and as we approach the end of the year, it is finally my favorite time of year, which is, of course, year-end list season. It's now finally that time where I get to go back and talk about all of my favorite and least favorite music that has come out in the last year. I've obviously reviewed quite a few albums in 2025. However, I thought the first video I would do on my year-end list series this year will be one talking about all of the albums I listened to this year but didn't review. In total, I did listen to over 100 new albums that came out this year, and obviously I only have a limited amount of time on my hands, so it would have been almost impossible for me to actually do a full dedicated review to every single one. And I will obviously generally prioritize reviewing albums that I actually care about or really enjoyed or just was excited about in some capacity. I do still have quite a few albums to talk about today that I did really enjoy that will be on my main year-end list. However, a lot of what I'm going to talk about are also the albums I didn't like or albums that I just didn't get round to reviewing for whatever other reasons. I'm not going to go through these albums strictly in my exact favorite order. However, there will definitely be an overall upwards trend as we go along in how much I enjoy each album I talk about. So with that being said, let's start off with the new Maroon 5 album, Love Is Like. I did not enjoy this at all, which really did not come as a surprise to me at all. Maroon 5 have not released a good album pretty much since Songs About Jane, and this is truly just one of the most boring and unoriginal and uninspired projects I've heard just ever, to be honest. And don't kill me for this one, but I also just unfortunately did not enjoy the Playboi Carti album music at all either. I found it to just be far too long and bloated and messy, and it just never slows down for its hour and a half runtime. Is just completely unnecessary. And this album on the whole is just a complete mess that I do not see myself coming back to likely ever. And of course, there was the new Ed Sheeran album that, again, complete mess, although this one, unlike the Playboi Carti album, was not only extremely messy, but also just so bland and boring. And in a way, I almost even admire how he was able to pull off an album that was simultaneously such a mess, but also so bland, which I suppose is kind of typical of an actual full-length Ed Sheeran album at this point. Definitely also can't go without mentioning the new Taylor Swift album. That's, of course, one that I did listen to, and one that I think we've all heard enough about at this point. I think that production and music-wise, it's far from her best, but also far from her worst. However, the lyrics on this project are just some of the cringiest things I've ever heard come out of Taylor Swift, which is saying a lot because she's had some real stinkers in the past when it comes to her lyrics, but this album is just truly like nothing I've ever heard from her before. Honestly, to the point where while listening to it, you would actually forget that this woman is engaged and in her 30s. We've also got the new Addison Rae album, Addison, which is one that, again, just pretty bland for the most part. I think that there is definitely potential here, she's clearly got talent, and I did have somewhat high expectations for this album, and I think that in future projects she could improve, but I think that for now this one is just far too bland and generic to really be anything all that interesting, as I think that a lot of the influences that she takes from other pop artists are maybe just a little bit too obvious to the point where she struggles to find her own sound with this one. Also, the Kid Cudi album Free is one that, again, I just found quite bland, quite generic, which I think at this point is pretty much exactly what you would really be expecting from Kid Cudi, given just how his last few projects have been all pretty much the same, and this one is kind of just continuing that, which is a big part of the reason I didn't review it. I just simply didn't find it interesting enough, and that's kind of why I didn't review a lot of the albums towards the lower end of the list. They just simply weren't interesting enough to actually be able to have a full review for them. And there's, of course, also the Sabrina Carpenter album, Man's Best Friend, which did have one or two pretty good tracks on it, but again, on the whole, pretty generic pop album. Didn't dislike too much of it, but it just wasn't really all that interesting to me. And I think that the same can be said for the new Men I Trust album, and they're a band that I have enjoyed a couple of their albums in the past, but their style just doesn't really do that much for me. But I do always listen to their new stuff, just in case it's something that does grab my attention, but unfortunately this one was overall okay, but just not really all that interesting in my opinion. There was, of course, also the Ghostface Killer album, Supreme Clientele, and I think, unfortunately, the case with Ghostface Killer, which I think would be said for most of the Wu-Tang Clan, is despite having many classics throughout his career, I think that at this point he's kind of just doing his thing, perfectly good, but not exactly as groundbreaking as he once was, and I think that that comes through quite clearly on Supreme Clientele too. There was, of course, the new Skrillex album, which, to be honest, I actually enjoyed more than I thought I would. I think this one is decent overall, and I was initially very surprised by how positive the reaction was to it after it came out. And despite Skrillex not exactly being the kind of music I would ever really go out of my way to listen to. This one, all things considered, was not actually too bad, despite it being still pretty messy in some parts. I also spent a fair bit of time with the new Chat Pile and Hayden Pedigo album, In the Earth Again, and I think partly my issue with this one is just how accustomed I've become to Chat Pile's usual kind of style. And in a way, I do quite like how darker and softer and moodier this album is, but it just didn't quite give me what I was looking for that I would typically be wanting out of a Chat Pile album. And there was, of course, the new Danny Brown album, which I did think was actually not too bad. I think definitely quite messy in a lot of parts. I think it definitely lacks focus and coherence, but there was still just a lot of individual tracks that I really liked, a lot of great features on this album too. Also, just out of sheer curiosity, I did get to know the new Lexi Jones album reasonably well, and I think that there are a handful of cool moments and ideas on this one. Obviously, being David Bowie's daughter, that is a hell of a lot to live up to, but just treating this album as a project in its own right, it's not too bad. I think there are just a lot of great pop moments on it. I also spent a fair bit of time with the new Ginger Bee album, Apyri, which I did actually really like. I do wish it were a bit longer, it's only just over 20 minutes, but I think that the genre blending on this album is actually really good. I love the emo elements, the folk rock elements, the indie rock elements. It's just all around a really fun album to listen to. I did also quite like the new Creeper album, Sanguivore 2, The Mistress of Death, being a really good follow-up to their previous album, Sanguivore, and actually I think overall maybe being just a little bit better. I think that their signature element of glam punk is absolutely on point on this album, as well as just generally the writing performances all around just being really good. I did also really like the new Sheerling album, Motherfucker, I Am Both Amen and Hallelujah, which this album is quite an insane experience. It's literally just one song that's an hour long, and explores various different genres from hardcore punk to noise rock to post rock, and it's all around just a really weird but interesting listen. If you're at all familiar with the film Inland Empire, it's kind of like that, but in album form is the best way I can describe it. Then there's, of course, the new Kali Uchis album, Sincerely, which I did think was pretty good. Just all around a really nice, smooth, well-written, well-produced pop album. Not really many complaints about that one at all. And then there was, of course, the other FKA Twigs album, the one I didn't review, the Eusexual Afterglow, which is kind of just what it says it is. It's just, I think, some of the leftovers from Eusexual, which is an album I absolutely loved. Definitely one of the most positive reviews I've done this year. But to be honest, for an album of leftovers from a project as good as Eusexual, I still found there to be really a lot to enjoy about this one. I think that any number of these songs still could have made it onto the main album, and it would still have been just as good. I also did quite enjoy the new Imperial Triumphant album, Gold Star, which I just found to be such a unique and really interesting death metal album. And I think it just does a great job of kind of displaying where the genre is at this moment in time, but still kind of doing some other things that do make it quite unique. I did also find myself quite enjoying the new Gigi Perez album, At the Beach in Every Life, which was on the whole just a really nice, calm and soft folk album that I just really enjoyed listening to when I fancy something much softer, and this album definitely does a great job at just that. And there's of course the new Ali X album, Happiness Is Going to Get You, which despite being quite the departure from her album last year, Girl With No Face, which I absolutely loved, being one of my favourite synth pop albums of the last few years, this one was a bit of a shock to me at first because she goes kind of back to more of her typical usual pop style, but it's still actually a really good project. As much as I was hoping that she would continue the more synth pop direction she took on her previous album. After that, I also really liked the new Rochelle Jordan album, Through the Wall, which was just a really nice, fun, relaxing, and reasonably chill, but still somewhat upbeat and really cool electronic and dance music album. I also found myself really liking the new Navy Blue album, The Sword and the Soaring, which I do find to be just such a unique hip-hop album in the sense that it's just such a strange, almost surreal and ethereal experience to listen to, and is definitely one of my standout hip-hop albums of the year, at least in terms of just how unique it is. I'm also really enjoying the new Alex G album, Headlights, which is just such a nice, heartfelt little folk album. It's one that almost feels like it's just a really simple indie folk project at first, but there is actually quite a lot going on the more you listen to it, which is always an experience I enjoy when listening to a new album. La Dispute also released an amazing comeback album this year with No One Was Driving the Car, with this easily being one of my favourite post-hardcore and emo albums of the year, and definitely a fantastic return from their previous album that just didn't feel quite as inspired as much of their other best material. Then we of course have John Michael and Anthony James teaming up on their new project Ego Trip, which is just such a fun and in a way almost wholesome hip-hop album that I've just enjoyed listening to so much this year. The production is so smooth, I really like the chipmunk soul elements in the vocals, and just all around this is just such an amazing experience of an album to listen to, and I've of course also loved the new Quadeca album, Vanisher Horizon Scraper, and I'm just so glad to see how much Quadeca has improved since his early hip hop days, which is just really not great at all in my opinion. But I think that this new kind of folky, arty, poppy direction he's taking just suits him and his style so well, and he's pulling it off amazingly on this project. I, of course, also have been loving the new Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist album, Alfredo 2, which I actually think is just as good, if not better, than Alfredo 1, which is also an album that I do, of course, really enjoy. I think that Freddie Gibbs's rapping is just some of his absolute best on this project, as well as The Alchemist also coming through with some absolutely fantastic production. Also, the Toss album You're Weird Now, I think, is just one of the most original and fun albums I've heard this year. I love the elements of dance punk, of psychedelia, and even a little bit of synth pop sprinkled in there. I think is just such a cool little touch. Also been really enjoying the Preservation and Gabe Nandez album Sortilege. I think is just such a cool and unique abstract hip hop album. Obviously, massive MF Doom influences on this one that I'd love to hear. I'm a massive MF Doom fan, but I think that there's just still enough going on this project that makes it still really unique in terms of just the atmosphere, the vocal style, and everything. Another album I've absolutely loved this year is the new Candelabro album, which, if you're not a fan of the new direction that Black Country New Road are taking, I cannot recommend this enough because it definitely helps to scratch that itch. As they managed to come through with such amazing vocal performances, guitar riffs, and obviously instruments like the saxophone in there as well, really give it that kind of classic Black Country New Road feel. But despite the very heavy windmill scene influence on this album, they still managed to have their own strong sense of identity with everything they do. And I think this is definitely one of the most unique kind of art pop, art rock albums I've heard this year. I've also been really enjoying the new Rosalia album, Lux. I love this album for its orchestral elements and just how epic it feels, as well as just having some absolutely fantastic features from many artists that I love and many that I didn't know and have wanted to discover because of this album. I've also been obsessed with the new Honingbana album, Soft Spot. I think is just one of the most incredible and passionate post-hardcore albums I've heard this year. The energy that this album has is just quite like nothing else. It's completely unmatched, and it manages to maintain that energy for its entire runtime without at any point feeling exhausting or boring or anything quite like that. And then the final album I'll be talking about today is the new Heremic album, Seeking Darkness, which, despite this album coming out so early in the year, I only got round to listening to it very recently when it did finally come out on streaming. And I'm so glad that I did get the chance to listen to this because it's amazing, and I'm so excited to put this on my year-end list. I just love the elements of noise rock and of post-rock that he used, and overall it's just such an incredible and ethereal journey that it takes you on. And given how much I've enjoyed much paranormal stuff in the past, I was not surprised by how much I love this one too. And so that's everything. That is every single album I've listened to this year that I didn't do a formal review for. And so any album that hasn't been reviewed by me in a video or that wasn't talked about in this video is just not an album I got around to listening to this year. I do obviously still have a long list of albums that did come out that I want to listen to, but I just haven't got around to yet. But I'm not going to make a video of that because that's just completely pointless, and we'll be here all day talking about all of the potential albums I want to get around to. And then I do, of course, have a few more year-end list videos planned, as well as my main top albums of the year list, which I will hopefully be getting out at some point in December. For now, these have been my absolute favourite albums that I've heard this year that I didn't get around to giving a formal review that I still wanted to have the chance to talk about. Thank you so much for watching this video. Do be sure to listen to any of these albums yourself and let me know what you think of them. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.